we always had this feeling of there's something inside that is so much bigger than, like, it wouldn't fit into the room that we are sitting in, and it would feel kind of suffocating in a way. Hey all and every many, thanks for switching into Housemates for Life, a podcast powered by plurals for plurals and everybody else who wants to hear more about the insanely awesome world of plurality. Here we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful sides of sharing a body and mind. In this episode we talk about the headspace and inner world, which is a common feature for plural systems. We will tell you a bit about what that actually means, how we experience it in ourselves, and how our headspace and inner world have changed over time, and what it can look like for us and other systems as well. We are the voices of just a rather very insane system, aka Jarvis. I'm your host Matt, and I'm here today with my headmate Yori. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, Housemates for Life, please tell a friend or more and leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and everything else you do to show your support and appreciation. Many thanks. Now, without further ado, let's get on with our show. I will give over to my headmate Yori now. Go ahead. Thank you, Matt. This is Yori today. I wanted to record this episode today because I don't know, it feels like this is a topic that I want to talk about, or I should talk about. Let's see. So, what is a headspace and or inner world? So we make a difference between headspace and inner world, but we will talk about that more in depth later on. Just a brief introduction. So headspace is basically your mental space, and it can take many different forms and have many different functions, not just exclusively for plural systems, but I guess every human has some sort of access to some form of mental thinking space or feeling space. And some people have what we would call an inner world, so it's kind of a mental landscape or area you can go to. And this is rather common for plural systems. Not necessarily, not all systems have access to an inner world, but it is a very common feature a lot of plural systems have. And to be honest with you, it was one of the features that when we first heard about plural systems and read about what kind of all the things that plurality entails, and when we heard about inner worlds, we felt extremely validated. We felt like that was one of the major points that convinced us that plurality is what describes our subjective experience, because we always had this kind of inner world. We just never really knew what to do with it. And it was just there. So hearing about plurality and that there are people out there who experience exactly the same thing, yeah, it felt extremely validating to us. But more about that later. So we will first describe to you how we perceive our inner world or our headspace, or let's call it inner space or mental space. First of all, we make a difference between headspace and inner world. So headspace would be more like our working memory, the mental space that we hold for active thinking processes. So our mind is extremely visual, and this is not for all people. Many people don't have this kind of visual experience of their mental space, but for us it's like that. And I think Matt wants to talk about this one point. Wait a sec. Hi, Matt here. Just a quick interjection, because this fits so good into our previous episode on co-piloting, where my headmate Will and we talked about how it is to co-front and be co-conscious and co-host a system. If you haven't checked out that episode yet, please do. It was a lot of fun to record. Anyhow, it's like when we are co-fronting, it's a bit like we experience each other in this mental headspace thing. It's like having another presence next to you or behind you. And if we think about things, like if you're making plans or, I don't know, thinking about stuff, then as Yuri said, it's kind of visualized in our head. And then if you want an example, it's like if you know Iron Man, for example, being in his suit, and then you have this kind of overlay of information coming in, like you can see what's happening outside, but you can also see at the same time certain information popping up, like an overlay on top of quote unquote reality. I mean, everything is real to us, everything is part of our real experience. So it basically feels like also like playing a video game, and you have like you have a map, you have some other information on your screen depending on what kind of game you play, and yeah, sometimes these things blur into each other, and it feels like, okay, you can't really focus on what's going on outside because there's so much going on inside, and it can be messy depending on our stress levels and how much we have to think about in the moment. But yeah, that's kind of our headspace in a way. So it's kind of the current state of mind, the current thinking process going on in our head. And when we co-fronting, co-conscious, then it feels like if we focus, we can actually see each other more or less. It's not like we're really seeing each other, like we're not blocking our visual seeing ability, whatever. So it's not like a hallucination, it's not like some psychotic experience. So we know that it's not actually there. It's more like an overlay. So if you have a hallucination, you usually don't know if you're really seeing it or not. So you have to like reality check the visual experience that you have. But for us, it's more like it's there, but we also know it's not there in a way. I don't know, I'm just rambling here. I just wanted to interject this one. I will hand over to Yuri again. So this is what we would call a headspace. And then there's inner world, which we personally feel like is a little bit different because we don't always have access to it, and we certainly don't have always and at any moment access to it. We would need to relax and focus to access the inner world space. It's kind of like a form of meditation or a very focused daydream. And I am pretty sure many people have experienced this before, having like this kind of meditative dream journey where you're guided to a mental space. It's kind of like that. And I guess it also depends on your how much you visualize things in your head. So for some people, maybe it's more about sounds or touch, smell. Maybe these things are more intense in your mind. But for us, it's more the visual part. And what distinguishes our inner world from these kind of dream journeys is that the inner world is more or less persistent. So it's a place that is like, it's like a reoccurring theme. Like we can alter it to some degree, and it changes by its own to some degree, but it's kind of fixed in a way. It's always the same place. It changed throughout time, but it's not temporary. It's like if I would do a guided meditation for this kind of dream journeys, then that mental space I enter, it would be temporarily there while I'm on this trip. But afterwards, my memory of it would be as vague as literally a dream. But the inner world is it's like a second home, more like a holiday resort in a way. And then there's another thing that we would call the fictional paracosm. So you probably have heard of that from many authors, especially fantasy writers or science fiction, have this sort of paracosm. Some even create their whole works around that. So they have multiple writings all playing out in the same cosmos or universe. Not necessarily connected, but it's the same space. So that is kind of comparable to an inner world. It's just that, and this is arguably, but so our inner world was just there. We didn't make it up. Whereas our paracosm, on one hand, we made it up. On one hand, we put intentional creative effort into it. On the other hand, this is a bit philosophical, but maybe it was already there before, and we just, like, what we consider our creative process is just bringing what's already there forth into consciousness. Who knows? But for us, there is a bit of a difference between our inner world and our fictional world that we explore in our creative writing. Our inner world, we have actual access to it, so we can go there and exist there. Whereas in the fictional world, it's more like watching a film or a theater play or something like that. Yeah, I would call it that. The fictional world is more like a stage where we can watch characters play, or we ourselves are kind of method actors playing, but it's all intentionally fictional, whereas the inner world feels more quote-unquote real. I hope this makes sense. And disclaimer, this is all our experience, so if you experience these things differently, that's absolutely valid and legit. I will talk about this later in this episode, but yeah, there are so many ways to have a mental space, and this is just one example. So I mentioned this before, that our inner world and our headspace, or like our mental space, has changed over time. And this is also strongly connected to our discovery journey, our journey to becoming aware of our system. And I think this is also why I would like to talk about this, because it feels very strongly connected to my personal experience of plurality and systemhood. So I've talked a bit more in depth about our discovery journey in a previous episode, and here now I will describe how that affected our inner mental space and how it changed. So first of all, our inner world has changed over time. So in the past, when we were like teenage age, our inner world was different. First of all, smaller and a different place. Back then it was more like a lake in a forest. And I feel like it was very much inspired by a painting that we saw back then. It was a painting of a swan on a lake in a forest. And we were quite obsessed with that painting back then. Not sure why. But yeah, it reminded us, our inner mental space reminded us of that painting, or vice versa. But yeah, fast forward many years, our mental inner world was suddenly different. I don't know when it changed or when we noticed. I just noticed one day that there is this inner world, and it's more like it's a campsite close to a cliff, looking over a fjord, very similar to a landscape typical of Norway. And also this one is probably very much inspired by our obsession with these kind of landscapes. So we like to go on hikes and travel to Scandinavia and such, and camping is a very wholesome, fun experience for us. So I guess our mind just thought this would be a cool place to be. And yeah, first, so this is all before discovery, and didn't think much of it. I just noticed I can access this place and I can actually see these other people that I recognize as quote unquote myself in this inner world. I can see them there and I can talk to them there. So much for the inner world. Our headspace, or like a bit like a space between headspace, between the front and the inner world, somewhere in between there. In the very beginning, before discovery, there used to be this white room. It was like an empty space. Think about the film Matrix, if you know that. They have this kind of in-between space which is not really yet plugged into the matrix, but it's still a virtual space which is completely white, and they can like summon whatever they wish. And it was kind of like that, this white room, and our system members would just be there. But it was literally empty. We didn't even have any chairs to sit on. It was just white and us standing there. And we had like very fixed positions where we would stand. And I think this comes a bit from our synesthesia, that like we have numbers and the letters of the alphabet, they are kind of arranged in space for us, and it's a very fixed, rigid position for each number and letter. And similarly, it was each of our headmates that we discovered throughout time had this very particular position in this white room, headspace place. So it felt a bit like, kind of like when you play a video game and you have this character selection screen. It felt a bit like that. Kind of, it's not like that anymore these days, but that would be a place where would be if we feel dissociated or feel like we are switching quote unquote character. So yeah, we had all these fixed positions, and I myself, Yuri, I would kind of feel like I'm at the center of this. Well, back then I thought I am one, but probably it was me, Matt, and Will, the three of us, blended together to this, what we thought is our core identity, but effectively it was just the three of us fronting the most. So we thought we are the quote-unquote main identity, and we found ourselves at the center of this white room character selection screen. And then the more handmaids we would discover, it wasn't that many, but we would like find them left and right of us, and at some point behind us. And right before discovery, where we started to notice that I'm not just one, but there's also Matt and Will. As soon as they got their names and we figured that they are distinct from what we thought is our core identity, they started to emerge from where my position was, or our position was. They emerged from there, right behind me, left and right, and they would just be there. And so our headspace would just expand like that, this white room. And this was still before discovery. And it was really like just very rigid. It was kind of a mental map of our mental state, basically. That's how we thought about it. And back then, thinking in terms of parts, which nowadays we definitely don't think of ourselves as parts. Each of us has parts, but we are not parts. And and then upon discovery, this white space started to become more and more fluid and dynamic. So in the beginning, we still found ourselves at each of these positions, but for some reason, it's like before it was really like we were just standing there, but then we figured we can actually move. We can move around, we can switch positions. So when we would be co-conscious, we would naturally appear relative to the fronter's position. So if I would front, then, and if my handmaid Will would be co-conscious with me, would usually appear on my, is it left, right? On my left, on my left side. And it would feel very awkward and would require a lot of mental strength to actually switch sides. But nowadays, everything is so much more fluid and dynamic. We don't even think about this white character selection screen anymore. We just move around in Headspace, and usually, if we're co-conscious, we can visualize each other at any position that we want, any position that we can think of. So that has loosened up for us. And also our inner world has expanded since then. So in the beginning it was really just this one campsite. It was kind of the entrance point to our inner world. And over time, more and more places would pop up, often inspired by music. We would listen to music and then connect the music to other places, and they would just be there, and they would just suddenly explode and just be there and connected to the central point of our inner world. And I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of this automatic process in our head. We don't really do it on purpose, and sometimes we're afraid that things grow too much and it becomes overwhelming and we have no control over it. It hasn't happened like that yet, but we we don't really put conscious effort into building our inner world, which may be different to other systems, but that's how it's for us. We just let it grow organically, I guess, or not. But yeah, one more thing I wanted to talk about is that before discovering our system and plurality in general, we always had this feeling of there's something inside that is bursting, about to burst. It really felt like our chest is crammed with something. We couldn't really put it into words back then. But our mind and our emotional experience always felt so much bigger than, like, it wouldn't fit into the room that we are sitting in, and it would feel kind of suffocating in a way. And before discovering our system and plurality, we found a bit of relief through writing. So writing, kind of creative writing, enabled us to somehow put into words what we were feeling inside. Not exactly, more like wrapping it and packaging it into metaphors and these kind of stories and characters that we would come up with, and like distributing what was inside into all of that. And that felt quite relieving already. But then hearing about plurality and about inner worlds and Headspace, we suddenly exploded. Like, not just that we figured out more about our identities and our emotional chaos, but also we finally found words to describe this inner mental experience. And hearing about other people talking about it, it felt like everything that was crammed inside this human body suddenly had a free way to unfold outside of this body, like literally and metaphorically. So metaphorically, we felt like we can finally talk about it. We can finally tell others about it, have them listen to it, and the same way we can listen to others telling about their experiences. So having that metaphorically put out there into the physical world, or also sometimes called meat space. And at the same time, our inner world experience started to manifest outside. So our headspace was not just in our head. It's, as Matt described before, it's kind of this visual experience that we have and that we now can better see and understand and make use of. And it's become so much more an integral part of our experience, of our perception. Like before, it was more like, yeah, there is this weird thing in our head, and let's not get distracted, right? It's just daydreaming, or it's just fantasy, or whatever. It's meaningless. It's not important to our life. But now we actually really start to appreciate it. Not always, not all of us. I just, Will in the background was reminding me that he sometimes feels extremely exhausted and overwhelmed by all of this. So yeah, it can be overwhelming, visually and mentally overwhelming. But that's our brain, that's how it works. And we start to learn to appreciate that more and more and acknowledge and accept it into our daily life and experience. So yeah, discovering our system it felt like a plug has been pulled, and since then everything is just pouring out, and we are free of all these constrictions we had before, like thinking we had to cramp everything into just this one human being and this one identity, which just didn't fit. it never fits, and it will never fit. So yeah, we just let it unfold as it does. And finally, I would just like to remark once again, this is just our personal experience, and like plurality itself, the experience of headspace and or an inner world or inner mental space is very subjective, and it's very individual. It can even be very different for different handmaids inside one system. Even singular people probably have some sort of experience of an inner mental space, and it's all so different. Like brains are amazing things. We have so many connections between neurons in our brain. We once heard there are more connections in the brain than there are apparently atoms in the universe, which sounds like a lot. But it would explain why we can, as humans, we can access these mental spaces, because they are literally an entire universe. And some systems and some people even experience their inner world as a universe. So they have multiple galaxies, star systems, planets where headmates can reside or live, or even be celestial beings. But it doesn't have to be so big. It doesn't have to be this spacey. Often system report that their inner world is more like a house, or even a room, just a room, plain room, or not so plain room. They can decorate their room, or their system lives in a house and every handmaid has their own room to decorate as they please, which sounds really cool actually. We sometimes wish we had that, and probably could create such a thing, but it also takes a lot of mental practice if it's not already there, I guess. So yeah, some systems, and not just systems, also singular people. Some people actually literally build their inner world from scratch. So ours was just there and ours just expands on its own, but some people actually build or recreate and change their inner world at will. Some systems even have system members who have this kind of quote-unquote role of being an architect or builder and work on the inner world architecture, which sounds pretty amazing, to be honest. And we wish so much we could just travel to other people's inner worlds and visit them there and have a tea party, have a guided tour or something like that. That would be so cool, I guess. And if you don't have an inner world as a system, don't worry. It doesn't invalidate your plural experience. It doesn't invalidate you at all. You are valid with or without inner world access. And some systems even have an inner world, but they have no memories of it. So members can go there, but they don't remember what happened there. So for us, it's similar. It's like we don't know where we are or what we are experiencing while we are not at front. And we can only create or have memories of our inner world if we actively choose to go there. So we need to pause whatever we do on the outside to be in this inner world, to access this inner world and create memories there. instead of at the front. And then there are systems, we have heard of systems telling us it's exactly the opposite. They have rarely memories of what is happening at the front, but they remember very clearly what they did in the inner world. So basically being somewhere in the inner world while some other handmaid runs the outside life, or outside life is managed by an autopilot, body autopilot, something like that. So we have heard so many different stories, and no brain is like any other, and so is no system is like any other, and whatever is going on in your head, it's a big mystery, I guess. It's things you can't really put into words, and certainly not test scientifically. So yeah, I don't know, people often talk about the quote-unquote real world, but in essence it's all real, it's all part of your experience, so keep that in mind. And yeah, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, and let them restrict you in your personal subjective experience, and use whatever you have in your mind. It's wonderful and magical, and I strongly believe it's there for a purpose. Not a purpose in the sense of meaning of life or something, but like your brain is such a creative, awesome thing, and I don't know what I want to say, but I feel like you probably get what I'm trying to say. Brains are amazing. Your brain is amazing. You are amazing. Thank you, Yuri, for this wonderful episode. This is Matt here again. And you guessed it right, this is the end of this episode, and here my headmate Yuri talked about Headspace and inner world, what that actually means in the plural community, and how we personally experience it ourselves. And now the question goes to you, our audience. How do you experience your headspace and or inner world, and how does it intertwine with your daily life or experiences? Let us know in the comments. This episode was brought to you by the Voices of Jarvis, with me, Matt, as your host, and my headmate Yuri running this episode today. Thank you all beautiful souls for listening and your support. If you enjoyed this episode today and think it brought a little bit of value to your life, please tell a friend or more and leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and all the good things. It will help others to find this episode and will support us on our creative journey. Many thanks. As I always like to say, let your personality shine brighter than your eyes and your confidence shout louder than your voice. Until next time with Housemates for Life. If you enjoyed this episode and our podcast, please tell a friend or more and leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and everything else you do to show your blah.